We should be live then. Hello, everyone. Please let us know in the chat if the sound is okay. Let us know if the sound and both the quality of the camera are okay. And we will be starting our discussion with Nikki soon. I hope you are all looking forward to it, at least as much as I am, because I'm really excited. Okay, it seems like the sound is okay for everybody. So welcome again, people who are joining. What will be the plan for today? So I'll start with a short intro about UXstre for those of you who might not be familiar with who we are and what our platform is about. Then for the main portion of today's webinar, we'll have discussion with Nikki about driving the business decisions with UX research ROIs. Please let us know in the chat if you have ever struggled with this in your professional career, and if so, how often do you struggle with this? And then after the initial discussion, we'll also have a Q&A session with the questions coming from the audience. So please, you are more than welcome to ask any questions in the chat, anything that you are interested in when it comes to this topic. Make sure to just put those questions in as we will go through the discussion with Nikki. So about UXstre, what is UXstre for those who do not know? It's first of all a research platform for UX research. It's a one-stop shop. You can learn more about organizing your content, empathizing with users, testing the usability of your product, and you can also set up interviews with your participants or your users. As you can see, you can test with us on websites, mobiles, and prototypes. So we got you covered on every step of the way. And not only that, we also help you with recruiting participants for your studies, because any study is only as good as the participants that you recruit for it. So we are always happy to help with it. The quality is guaranteed. You can recruit for any study that you can build any next week. We have basically the whole world covered with our panels, and what we are proud of is that we always take care of providing fair incentives to our participants. So based on this, you might understand that with us, you can recruit, conduct, and analyze your UX research all in one place. And if this caught your attention, we have prepared a special gift for you, a 1 month of UXstre subscription for free. You will receive this a month in your inboxes tomorrow, together with the link to the recording of this webinar, to make sure that you can return to it whenever you want to. If you want to learn more about UXstre, feel free to use the QR code right here. And that's all about UXstre for now. And please let me welcome our guest for today, Nikki. Hi, Nikki. How are you doing today?
Hi, yeah, I'm all good. How are you?
I'm great. It's always a pleasure to have discussions like this with experts like yourself who have so much to tell us all. As we can introduce you, but I think that most people who are here already know about you, as you've been in UX for some time, and you worked hard on empowering people, allowing them to learn more about UX research using your UX Research Academy platform and your user research strategist. So for those who don't know, Nikki is really passionate about all of this stuff and about learning and teaching about UX, and that's why she was so kind to join us today. So, Nikki, anything that I left out?
No, you got it. Thank you for the introduction. I'm super happy to be here and to talk about this awesome, very difficult and sometimes challenging for researchers topic. So yeah, let's do it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And before we dive deep into this topic, can you let us all know a little bit about what was the motivation for you behind just choosing UX as your career path, and what is driving you forward to keep getting better in this, basically?
Yeah. So I found out about UX at a party when I was living in New York City. So I was about to apply for my PhD in psychology. I had just finished or was finishing my master's program. And I had a really hard time in my program with the population that I wanted to work with within the mental health space. And somebody was like, "Have you tried UX?" And I was like, what's UX, because I come from an academic background. I'm old. I don't know digital things. Technology repels me, all that stuff. So I actually found out about it. I was in that really popular like boot camp generation when boot camps were like super duper popular and they were like the only way to learn. So I am one of the OG General Assembly boot campers, and I learned from that really expensive boot camp that I can't design. So I panicked. And then I was like, what else? And we had one day on user research, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like therapy, but for technology. And so I started diving into it, and I just loved everything about it. I am super curious. I love listening to people. I love understanding what they're trying to say and talk about, and like the hidden things, like subconscious things they don't even know that they're talking about and linking to, and uncovering things with people. And that has like kept me super interested in the field. And I love that research continuously evolves. Like we're not the same as we were 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so it's really, really fun to be in a space that just, yeah, it's just constantly changing. So I can't complain.
Yeah. So living in or working in a dynamic field like this, it's challenging, to
Yeah.
be honest, and but it also keeps you always motivated to keep on moving forward. So that's great. Before we go to the questions which delve into more specific portions of the topic for today, um, for you personally, how would you describe what the ROIs of UX research really are for those who are not familiar with this term, and what we can expect when we chat about this topic, basically?
Yeah. So ROI is return on investment. So we invest in user research, and what do we get back from it? Right. So that's kind of what this really means to me, is like, what do we get back when we do user research? So, for instance, if you go out and you pay for somebody to clean your car instead of cleaning it yourself, what do you get back? Right? You have time and you have a clean car. You didn't have to do anything, but you had to pay for it. Right. And so when we go out and we do user research, what do we get in return? And usually that to me is mitigating risk and helping support decisions. Now, ROI is always thought about, especially in the business world and in more of like metric based world, as hard numbers. And we can talk about like what that looks like. But like the main thing about user research is that we mitigate risk, manage risk, and help people make better decisions that are less risky and more likely to succeed for the teams that we're working with, the companies that we're working for, and the users that we're trying to help. Does that
So
make sense?
it's basically the trade-off that you get by
Yeah.
doing the UX research. It's not that we do it just because we find it fun and exciting. We do, but there is always a reason behind doing it,
Yeah.
a business reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And when it comes to this is the point of view that us UXers have, but when it comes to discussing this topic with stakeholders, I'm sure you have met several times with misconceptions, which tend to just weir the conversation into a direction that was not expected, maybe, and could be a little bit of a hindrance. Do you have any misconceptions like this in mind?
Yeah, so the biggest one is when we do qualitative research, right? So if we think about return on investment, usually you are talking about, or people think about larger numbers when you're talking about a return on investment. And I find that a lot of people have a lot of trouble understanding how you can get a return on investment with something like qualitative based research. Because there's that whole misconception of, well, you only spoke to insert number here, participants, right? You only spoke to 7 participants, you only spoke to 12 participants, you only. And I'm like, well, why don't you speak to them and see how hard it is and how much time it takes? Okay. You know, so that's a huge misconception, is that like just because it's qualitative doesn't mean that there's a return on investment, because there is so much that you can get from qualitative research that helps you mitigate that risk and support decision making. And a lot of people look for statistical significance, right, in qualitative research, and those two things like just like don't equal each other. Like statistical significance is for quant, is for numbers. And so I always tell people like who are struggling with stakeholders who are questioning numbers to talk through and learn a lot about theoretical saturation, because that's what we're trying to hit as qualitative user researchers, is like how many people do we have to talk to understand that we're hearing the same things over and over and over again. So we've been saturated with the information. We're not really learning anything new.
Yeah, and just because you ask a survey-based question to 200 people, it does not necessarily mean that you have asked the correct question that you want to ask. It does not mean that you are not leading, that you are not, you gave the participants enough space to properly communicate their opinions. And that's all that you can mitigate when you are doing an interview with them, for example, because you can see their reaction. You can veer the conversation into a direction to make sure that it is not biased and stuff like that. And this is sometimes so hard to explain to people who only see the simple comparison of 200 responses versus 5 responses. And this is the equation which simply does not make sense to them.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point. I think surveys are actually one of the hardest methodologies to get right.
Yeah.
They're like just really tricky, but stakeholders know them so well and like are always asking for surveys, but they are honestly like, I think they're one of my most least used methodologies, just because they have such a specific use case that doesn't actually come up that often to like use them correctly.
Yeah, they are deceptively complex. People think the people who do not know about surveys and have never conducted a survey for think like, okay, it's just ask them a simple question, give them 3 choices. It's easy, it's quick, it's easy to set up, it's easy to analyze, and then you are in a complete different spot than you wanted to be, just because you built the survey wrong or because you analyzed the wrong data.
Yeah.
So about misconceptions, another one which I think is really, really typical is that the stakeholders, they prefer the short-term gains compared to the long-term benefits. They'll tell you, we do not have time now to do like 2 or 3 weeks of research because we have a release planned in 2 weeks and we need a new feature, we need new stuff to sell because we are oriented on the short-term gains. And it's sometimes really, really hard to explain that it's okay to postpone the release or to take a little longer to make sure that you are actually creating a product for your users and not for the image of your users, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's up to us as researchers as well to like learn how to balance those short-term initiatives with the longer term initiatives. I remember like not being allowed to do generative research at one of the companies that I was first working for. And what I ended up doing was sneaking generative research into usability testing because I'm like, hey, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm a rebel. I was young, which I'm actually really grateful that I did, because I learned how to kind of like balance the two a little bit better. But I think that with stakeholders, we just need to like understand where we can and should push them and understand where it doesn't make sense to fight, and where we do our best to mitigate as much risk as possible and support whatever decision they're trying to make to the best of our ability. And I always give that caveat. Like, I've had many stakeholders who I sit down with and I'm like, listen, this is not going to be good if we do this, you know, I am letting you know that this is the risk that we're taking. If we continue on this path, it's up to you. Because
Mhm.
like I'm not that decision maker. I'm giving like a piece of the pie. I'm giving you information, and you're taking information from data analysts, you're taking it from marketing, you're taking it from sales, from account management, from customer support, from product marketing, like everybody. And I'm one of those pieces where I'm saying, here's the risk if we continue this forward. Let me know what you want to do.
Yeah, and ultimately it's their decision.
Yeah.
Even though when you could provide as much information as you want to, and in the end, they are those who need to make the decision. And just one last point about this, I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy. Like, you do not need to necessarily sacrifice the short-term gains in the favor of long-term benefits. You can do both if you set it up properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And speaking of chatting with the stakeholders, uh, not to be condescending, because educating as a word can sometimes be a little condescending, but it's important to remember that stakeholders are partners with the researchers, and we are there to help them uh, understand our approach and understand our findings.
Yeah.
And that's why it is a key portion of the whole process is educating them, discussing the approaches with them. Um, would you have any tips on this, or any like highlights of what cases you had in the past?
Yeah, I used to actually get really frustrated at stakeholders that didn't understand research, which isn't really fair, because it wasn't until I went through like agile training and I actually had to be I was a stand-in PM at one of my companies for like 6 months, and I had no idea what I was doing the first month, right? Even though I had like been around PMs my entire like career, I was like, well, what is this job that I thought that I knew? So like, it's not fair for us to expect stakeholders to truly understand everything about research. And so I think education is like a super great word for it. Like, sure, it could be condescending, but it's more like, hey, like, this isn't your job, so I can't expect you to know everything and do everything perfectly. Like, so that's why I have started partnering a lot more with my stakeholders and being like, hey, what doesn't make sense to you? What does make sense to you? Like, what questions do you have? Like, what's confusing? And I think like one of the most important points on here that helped me is that I continuously looked for feedback from my stakeholders. So I would always send like, I mean, we just talked about how much surveys suck, but I would always send a stakeholder satisfaction survey to my stakeholders after my research. And I would be like, you know, how easy or difficult was it to understand my insights? How actionable or unactionable were my insights? And that actually helped me with understanding what my stakeholders needed and what they understood and what they didn't understand. And then I could step in to be more informed about how I'm helping them or how I'm failing them.
Yeah, it's a two-way road,
Yeah.
because if you just um, focus on the research and you bring great results and everything seems to be just connecting within the research, it does not really matter if we are not able to communicate it properly and to help, not make them understand, but help them understand what are the actual findings, why it is important that it was discovered, and why it is important that it is actioned on.
Yeah. Yeah. And also keep in mind that like not everybody learns in the same way.
Yeah.
Like I used to always be like, well, here's the report. And it's like two things there. First, not everybody is like reads and understands. I'm really good at reading and understanding things, but a lot of people are visual. So like also ask your stakeholders like how do they digest information and make sure you sit with them afterwards, because just because you're like, oh my gosh, this is the best insight I've ever written, doesn't mean that they know what to do with it. Right.
Yeah.
Because you're the one who's sitting there with all this knowledge in your head, especially if they haven't like been along to all the sessions. Like, sit down with them and talk through how you can act on it, like how they could, and like brainstorm with them. That's the like a fun part of research that I feel like we forget about. Like, we have to activate this stuff, and like it can be really fun to sit down and be like, okay, this really cool thing that we learned, like what are all the different things that we can do? Like, let's put feasibility aside for a second and think about all the cool things, and then come back and apply the feasibility and see what sticks.
Yeah, because in the end, you are still one team.
Yeah.
You are still on the same side, and if you make just one step in the direction of meeting your stakeholders, as you have mentioned, just before you provide the results of the research, just have a 2 or 3 minutes chat with them and learn about their learning, and then make sure to not just talk about it, but also apply it on the presentation. Because as you mentioned, some people are visual, some people are audio. So
Yeah.
if you know that your stakeholders are, for example, audio learners, maybe don't send them 5 pages of a report, but like send them a micro podcast of these are the findings. You might want to hear this. And it's about the adaptability as well.
Yeah.
For you as a researcher, basically.
Absolutely.
And yes, we focused on the stakeholder side for a little bit and how we have to help them understand and basically how to mitigate the mistakes on their end. But sometimes researchers forget that they are also the part of the equation when the results are showcased. And as you have mentioned, one of the common mistakes might be choosing the wrong channel of showcasing, like report instead of slides instead of a micro podcast. Are there any other mistakes which might come to mind when it comes to the showcasing of the results?
Data overload. So, as researchers, we sit there and we're like, oh my goodness, everything is fascinating. Everything is important. It's not. It's not. And I know it is, but it's not. So I would say what can happen, and this is something that I used to do, is I was like, here are 50 slides of like all of this stuff that I learned, right? And then like nobody, like people would be asleep. I could cure insomnia with some of my old research reports, right? Like, oh, they were too much. And even 20 slides, that's a lot too, And so I would say one of the biggest mistakes is just overloading stakeholders with all of the data that you found. And I would say, instead of doing that, and what changed the game for me was going back and reading, okay, what are the big questions that they have? Let me answer those. That's my priority. That's the stuff that I'm going to lead with. And if anybody needs to dig deeper, or we need next steps to like do more research or uncover more insights or iterate or whatever it might be, then that goes later, or that goes into the appendix, or that's a follow-up that I do. Just, try not to overload those stakeholders, and really go back to like, what were the main 3 things that we were trying to figure out during this research, and like answer your stakeholders' questions, because I was horrible at that.
I think there are, first of all, researchers really, really love data. And sometimes it is hard not to enforce this love on someone else.
Yeah.
And it is also maybe remnants of the academia when people are asked to write white papers with really complicated words, and everything has to be cited with a source, which is great thing for academic papers, not a great thing for reporting your findings to a stakeholder.
Yeah.
And what I would really like to point out about what you said is the possibility of the iterative reporting. Like, give them the rough structure of the findings, and allow the stakeholders to basically get back to you with what they want to hear more about. And yes, you have the 50 slides prepared, but in your head at least, but in the end, they will tell you that only 15 of them are those that they want to see. And even if you show them the 35 other slides, they will skip them. So
Yeah.
it's just extra work for you, which in the end, they will skip it. So I find this really, really interesting and a nice point to try out this iterative reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to remember that they have jobs outside of listening to us.
Yeah, and not all of them necessarily had to go through the academic training and are not used to reading reports like this. And uh, just creating the report in more digestible way does not take any value away from it.
Yeah,
I would say it adds value to it, if anything.
absolutely. I agree. I agree.
And speaking of adding value and discussing the ROI with the stakeholder, do you have any life hacks on how to demonstrate the ROI to the stakeholders and maybe even to the members of your team, and the way in which it resonates and it is persuasive, and it's not dismissed? Maybe a little tip on how to sell the results of your research to your stakeholders.
Yeah, I always say like there are two things that are really helpful to do. So I actually just posted about this today on LinkedIn. Um, and it was about how user research should be a little bit more like real estate. Like a real estate agent, yes, they go through and they're like, look, this is the square footage of the house. This is how many bathrooms there are, but they're selling a dream. They're selling a vision. A good real estate agent will say, can't you imagine sitting on this porch and having coffee? Can't you imagine like this beautiful office space? Can't you imagine, waking up and going to the fair next door with your kids, right? Like they're selling a life and a dream and a vision. And I think user research should do the same thing. Like we should sell the vision, the future, the potential. And so a really, really great way to do this is to showcase before and afters. Okay. So before something was like this, after the research, how did it change? Right. And so that means that you need to be thinking before you even do the research, what are we measuring? Like, what is our success criteria? What are our success metrics? So let me give like a concrete example. Let's say that we're doing some usability testing on a like checkout flow. Somebody's trying to like purchase something and check out. Okay. And we have a coupon, we have a sale, but people can't find out where to put the coupon because it's hidden. So what that indicates to me is, if people are struggling to do that, let's say 50% of the people are struggling to do that, and the average order value is, $1, and we have 100 people who could be buying it, we might lose $50. We might lose half of those people if we don't fix this. So like the before is, if we don't do this, like the before is the current situation of like 50% of people are struggling. The after is if we fix this, we could increase our revenue by 50%. Like we could double our revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
So
always thinking about that measurement.
yeah, I really like the comparison to selling a dream. You're selling, because in the end, each UX researcher tries to create as good of a UI, as good of a product as possible for the for the users. Because yes, we can say that we are trying to create a perfect product, but does something like that even exist? So we are just trying to always be better than we were, and that's the dream that we are always trying to demonstrate, and to trying to persuade the stakeholders that it is worth following, and that it is worth putting in the time and the effort into always pushing forward the product and making it more usable, making it more intuitive for the users. And then if we manage to give this a concrete form, as you mentioned, with the ROI and the increase of the revenue or increase of the registrations or whatever is currently being discussed. That's what provides the ground to the dream, because the dream can sometimes just fly and it's hard to catch. But if you give it a ground like this, it's easier to grasp for the stakeholders and then easier to follow, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like think about your dream, like your own dream. So like my dream is to become a fiction writer, right? So if I want to sell myself that dream and if I want to achieve that dream, I have to do things to fix my or change my life. Like I have to write. I can't become a famous fiction writer if I never write anything, right? Our product can't become, the number one product in our category if we don't fix the problems, right? So always like try and put yourself into like, okay, what is the dream that I'm trying to sell them? And like, how do I help them understand how we can get to that dream? And oftentimes it is through research and uncovering these problems.
And for those among us who like frameworks and matrix, are there any frameworks that you like to use when it comes to quantifying the ROI?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the pirate metrics. Gosh, I'm so terrible. I always forget one of them. We have acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. Those are like the 5 main metrics that you can think about when it comes to quantifying the ROI of user research in a business impact. When it comes to other metrics, customer satisfaction, or even looking at like quantitative usability, so time on task, task success, and time on task success, number of errors that people have. Those are all really great ways of quantifying the ROI of user research. Like from, okay, it used like our task success was only, 50%. We did research, we found out how to fix it, and now we're up to like an 80% task success rate. So that's huge because then you can say, and of that percentage increase, we now have that many more customers, and that could then equal retention or revenue, right? So all of these things kind of like sit with each other, if that makes sense. So highly recommend the pirate metrics as a good way to get started too.
Okay. Um, and this is a point which wheels a little bit back to when we discussed the difference between the qualitative and quantitative methods, and how the qualitative insights can be sometimes a little more complex to directly tie to the revenue, because if you set up a survey and you ask the people that if this was added, how likely are you that you buy this product, and the likeliness is 9 out of 10, it seems rather straightforward that it can be bound to the revenue impact. Have you ever had a case when the connecting of the or the tying of the qualitative insights directly to the revenue impact was a challenge, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, it's always a challenge because qualitative research is more abstract, right? It's just harder to understand. So I don't always think that it has to be tied to revenue. Like you can tie qualitative research to other really, really important metrics than revenue. So for instance, one of them is like market share. That's really great. So, if we want to increase our market share, we need to do discovery research on different markets, right? And increasing market share literally increases revenue if you're successful. So, like, you can loosely tie it back. Or, let's say that we're doing something a little bit more like normal, I guess, because not everybody does like innovative market share based qualitative research. So let's say that we're doing user research on personas. That's very qualitative, right? So how do we tie those directly back to revenue? That's a little bit harder. But what I would say is that by doing personas and highlighting the major pain points of personas, we can go into each of those pain points and say, okay, like, users don't have an easy way to like filter through our search results. Okay, so hypothetically, if we were to fix that, how many more people would be able to filter through our search results and get to our end goal, which might be conversion rate, registration, or things like that. So you can't necessarily say like this qualitative insight exactly equals this thing. You might have to do a little bit more of going like a little bit more granular into like, well, if we did fix this, this could be this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like it can be hard to grasp the abstract portion of the qualitative insight, but if you are able to bind it to a specific step or specific portion of the UI, it can be easier to find the specific return of investment there.
Yeah. Yeah. You can also say like, for instance, like if there's something that an unmet need, if we were to meet this need, or like, everybody loves jobs to be done. If we don't currently help people do this job, if we did do this job, how many people would that impact? How many people could that convert? How many people could that retain? Right. So as long as you're just like trying to think about like, okay, if we fix this, if we did this, if we, it's predictive, but every single metric, most metrics, sorry, Tim Hairbig would kill me if I said all metrics are lagging indicators, because that's not true. But most metrics that we're looking at as user researchers are lagging indicators, which means that they come later. We learn about them later, right? We don't tackle many leading indicators. So we're always going to have to be retrospective, but saying, if we did this, this is what this could be like.
Yeah, I think that entirely makes sense.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, lagging matrix and looking back with the research, is it what are we supposed to do in cases when the immediate impact might not be as clear and measurable, when we are basically playing the long game with the research and aiming at goals which are more distant? How can we then present this to the stakeholders?
Yeah. So there is a predictive like outcome here. So you can potentially predict what this could help with. But I would say that stakeholders should understand leading and lagging indicators because they should be the ones who are really latched onto them. But there are other things that you can look at that are more immediate. So things like quantitative usability, right? You can get those answers fairly quickly. You can do benchmarking and understand pretty immediately, like how much your product sucks, because I promise that it probably does, because most products do, right? So like there are things that you can do in the meantime that still show your impact while you're waiting for bigger changes to come, or while you're waiting for, to see what the change in conversion rate is. And then I would also say on top of that, like, don't discount other forms of impact, like impact on optimizing processes. So like if you're able to recruit faster, if you create a framework that allows stakeholders to request research faster and get insights faster, like if you are creating a repository and people are reaching out to that repository and self-serving more, those are all huge forms of impact. So please don't discount all of those things just for business impact. Think about all the internal optimizations that you're doing about the process and frameworks that you have in mind too.
Mm-hmm. So not just, there are two ways to approach it, not just focusing on the business, but focusing also what you are basically doing to improve the internal culture and the internal processes, and also maybe setting up like smaller checkpoints before we get to the bigger impact in the end, to periodically prove the value of the research, basically.
Yeah.
And have you ever been, of course you have, but do you have any specific case when it was really high stakes business decision that was influenced by the UX ROI that you managed to bring to the table?
Yeah, I've killed many, many dreams. So for instance, one of the big dreams that I killed, I was working at a travel company and they wanted to offer like I don't know how exactly I don't know whose shower idea it was. But like they wanted to offer like almost like Amazon Prime for travel, like a package deal for travelers, based on our platform. And I was like, I don't think this is a good idea. Can we please concept test it? And it just flopped completely. And I was just like, please, no, let's not do this. We're going to waste so much money. Like this was the point where it's obviously lagging indicator, because I can't tell you 100% that it's going to fail. But I'm like, if we move forward with this, we are going to risk spending hundreds of thousands of euros and not getting anything back, right? Because one person said that they might be interested out of 15.
Yeah, and that's simply not enough. That's not
No. So I was very happy that they killed it, but they didn't listen to some of my other brilliant ideas. So you
no
can't
one
win
is
everything.
is it? Okay. This also connects a little bit to the explanation of the more long-term goals. Have you encountered like a specific point when you unexpectedly impacted either the direction or the culture of the company by your research?
Yeah, so I love working on like research ops and also like internal vibes and how people work together at an organization. And I actually did a service blueprint of like how our organization worked together, because we had quite a complex B2B product that went through like certain steps and certain teams. And what I was trying to like do the user journey, but inadvertently I wanted to understand like the internal mechanism behind it, and by mistake completely changed the way that our company worked by highlighting essentially like the journey that clients had to take behind the scenes, and like all of our inefficiencies as a team, the implementation inefficiencies, the handover inefficiencies, all of the like arguments that went on between teams about how they were frustrated with each other. And I completely changed how I didn't completely change. I helped highlight some of the things that we could fix, and like together, like we all changed how the company like implemented and took on clients. And it was like really, really cool and interesting.
An unexpected benefit of the research, right?
Yeah, I had no idea. I was like, I just wanted to do a journey map. And like we ended up with this awesome service blueprint and like behind the scenes and like completely changing our processes.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the company culture and working with people from different teams, which are not directly UX teams, because in the UX research job, it usually comes into interaction with people from marketing, that product or engineering. How do you deal with collaborating with people from such different backgrounds and positions? Can you be
Yeah,
challenging?
I absolutely love it. I think that it's so fun. So like I always go in, and this is like great life advice that I've found, is like I always go in asking people how I can help them. Right. So like I worked a lot with sales, for instance, on like buyer personas, because they were like, we don't know how to segment who's coming to us, and then like what we should talk about depending on who's like essentially the persona that's coming to us. And so like I was able to like help them with that. So I always go into these conversations kind of being like, hey, like this is my skill set. Like I'm not Liam Neeson. Like, like I'm very skilled at these things and I can help you in these ways, but like I'm like, okay, like how can I help support like your gaps in knowledge? How can I help support things that you like, processes that are not working out for you? So I always go in and it's almost like I do research on the teams, and always with that value prop of like, how can I help? And that's usually how I start to make relationships with people like account managers, with sales, with customer support, with solutions architects, data analysts. Like, but I try and just make friends with literally the entire company.
Yeah, and highlighting that you are on the same team in the end, and that it's in all everyone's best interest to collaborate and
Right.
to help each other. Uh,
Absolutely.
so just making friends is the is the question is the answer to this.
Yeah, making friends and influencing people. There's a book like that, right?
And how do you deal with cases when the best advice is to do nothing? When the research comes with a result that some major change or something like that may be even more detrimental than keeping it in the same place or introducing just a smaller change. This might be especially problem when the stakeholders are expecting and looking for making a big change, making a big impact, and it can in the end derail the journey of the product, right?
Yeah. So I've learned never to really promise any outcome from research, because like we don't know. And like part of research is evaluating the current product to ensure that we are in fact going in the right direction. So oftentimes the things that have come up where like I'm like, oh, like let's evaluate this new feature, and we evaluate it and it's like just it's fine as it is, right? Or like any changes would make it worse, or like we shouldn't do anything, we shouldn't make this change, we shouldn't add this new feature. I used to be some team called me the feature killer. That was like my nickname. Because like I was like, no, we like I always say like dev time is so precious, right? Devs are expensive. Devs are, the only people who can do what they do. Like, let's make sure that every single time spent that devs spend is like the best time that they can be spending. So whenever I encounter like, oh, we actually like somebody had this idea and we shouldn't do it, I talk about like how much time and money we could save by not doing it because people won't use it. So I try and always say like cost savings
Mhm.
with that.
So mitigating the expectations in the first place and not promising that we will make a great change based on the research that we are currently starting, because that's sometimes false advertising. and
Yeah.
and then also mentioning that uh, just because we have resources available to create a change in the product and introduce a change into existing feature does not necessarily mean that it is
Yeah.
the best use of those resources right now.
Yeah.
And for the last question, last topic from the structured discussion that we have right now before we get into the Q&A, so please make sure to provide any questions that you might have into the chat. Um, what is your take on ensuring that the findings are actually used and taken into the consideration? Have you ever encountered a case when you did all the research, had the findings prepared, and in the end they were disregarded or not taken into consideration for some reason?
For years, that was my life. And that usually indicates if this happens to me or happens to any of my students or anything like that, that usually indicates to me that we haven't understood what stakeholders actually need.
Mhm.
So always make sure that before you even start your research, it's very clear what questions stakeholders have and what the research goals are and what information you're looking to get, what decisions need to be made. I remember I had like almost like a Mad Libs, which is going to date me because nobody knows what Mad Libs is anymore. But like a fill in the blank of like what to kind of fill out, and it was something along the line like, I need X information in order to make Y decision by Z timeline, right?
Mhm.
So like if a stakeholder can fill out like, I need this information to make this decision by this time, then you know what information they need, what decision they need to make, and by what time they need to do it. So whenever findings aren't used, it's usually because they don't answer the actual question or they come too late.
Mhm.
So making sure that before you even do the research, you're ensuring that you know exactly what people need and that you're catering your research to that and answering those questions for them directly.
Yeah, and also just by asking the three questions that you mentioned, like what is the information, what is the decision, and when do I have to make it, is allowing the stakeholders to take a step back, maybe, and think it through what they actually want to have as a goal for the research, and this way you can easily align or easier align on the actual outcome or actual expected outcome of the research.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so this would conclude the structured portion of our discussion, and in just a few moments, we will move on to the Q&A from the chat. And if you have enjoyed the discussion with Nikki so far, make sure to check out our Geeks podcast hosted by our colleague Tina, where she invites esteemed UX researchers such as Nikki to discuss great topics. Other people who have joined Tina, for example, include Kevin Liang, Stephanie Walter, Vitaly Friedman, and many other esteemed researchers. So we will start our Q&A session with the questions that arrived before the stream via the survey that we shared on LinkedIn with our followers. So Nikki, the first question that came in the survey was a case in which one of our followers is working for a luxury or high-end brand, and the clients are usually people who focus on the high-end clothing and other luxury items. And the problem that the person who asked this question brought up was that they believe that including clients like this in the UX research process might basically diminish the brand image of the brand because it's a luxury item. They do not want to be bothering the clients with surveys, interviews, and stuff like that because those people just want to buy those goods. So this was the concern of the stakeholder, and the person who asked this question wanted to learn more about how to combat this situation, basically.
I mean, so for I've worked with some higher end like luxury type products. I've also worked with like very well paid people who don't care about incentives, right? So like you can't offer a neurosurgeon a $50 Amazon gift card,
Yeah.
right? Well, you can, but it's not going to make or break anything. So there's an assumption here that I think the stakeholder might have is that people who are purchasing these high end products are not wanting to talk to anybody, let's say. I would immediately say, does that mean that Apple has never done any research? Does that mean that Tesla has never done any research? Does that mean that, and literally list out a lot of luxury products that are probably more expensive than high-end clothing that reach out to their customers?
Mm-hmm.
Totally fine. I know for a fact that Apple reaches out to their customers on a regular basis to do testing on iPhones, which now are very, very expensive. And I had, I bought a Mac desktop. I had people reach out to me about doing research on that. That Mac desktop was very, very expensive, right? So I would say that there might be an assumption here that is untrue. And the thing that I would recommend doing is kind of saying, okay, we don't know for certain if people would be upset or not. Let's find out. Let's
Mm-hmm.
pilot something small. Let's reach out to people because I know without a shadow of a doubt, this is how research works. People like to talk about themselves. People who are invested in higher price point products are actually more likely to talk to you. So like I would say to the stakeholder, hey, all of these other expensive brands are doing research. They're doing research successfully. Nobody's like saying, I can't believe Apple reached out to me. People are usually pretty jazzed. And like, then I would come up with like, what would be a fun incentive for these people? Right? Like, could we do a giveaway? Could we do like an event? Could we do a discount code that's like super exclusive? Could we do like a like come to our, depending if you're in person, like how cool would it be to be like, hey, for everybody that comes, like come to our exclusive like in-store experience, right? Like do something luxurious and high end then for the incentive. And I think that you'll have a lot of very happy people to participate.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that the people who invest into luxurious items want those luxurious items to meet their needs and to meet their expectations. So they are inclined to provide their feedback to assure that this is the case.
Yes, the number of times. So like I love clothes and I love bags and I love shoes, and I will sometimes invest in higher end things. And when like people ask me about that experience, I'm like, hey, yeah, I actually do want to talk to you because I expect the experience to be at a certain level. And if it's not, I want to let you know.
Another question that arrived was about preparing in the UX research and preparing the UX research in general. I would say that it's really specific for each project and there are many different things to account for. But would you say that there is like at least one or maybe a few must-have steps when it comes to preparing UX research? Um, I think you are muted. Okay. Just a second. Let us figure out what happened right now. And
Can you hear me better now?
yes,
Okay.
we can hear you right now.
I had to change the settings slightly. I think my beautiful Yeti microphone decided that it was tired and ready to go to bed. But so my first thing always is please talk to your stakeholders. Always start by talking to your stakeholders and asking them what they need. And then the second thing is come up with like your before and after, your success metrics, your success criteria. What is that looking like? How are you going to like, how do you answer the question of how was this project successful, right?
Mhm.
And then from there, make sure that your goals, your research goals are really clear because those goals will tell you who you need to talk to, so participants, and what method you need to choose, right? So like, and then write that research plan, write that all down, and then go back to your stakeholders and be like, does this make sense? Right. So like really getting clear on like what do the stakeholders need, what's your success criteria, and then what are your research goals and those expected outcomes.
Yeah, so make sure that the fundamentals are stable and solid, and then the specifics which are required for one project or another, then they can be amended and built around these sound fundamentals, basically.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Always go back to the basics.
And now we can start tackling the questions which came into the chat throughout the live stream. So first up, we have back to the surveys. Can you give some real-world examples you personally experienced of how to use surveys and how not to use them?
Yeah. So whenever I've tried to use surveys for anything qualitative, it has always failed. So, for instance, if I'm sitting there trying to ask people why they are doing a certain thing, why they are feeling a certain way, what their deeper motivations are, if I'm asking open ended text, I am failing at my survey, right? Like your surveys need to be like extremely pointed, specific, and concise. So, like, if you can ask a very basic question, so frequency might be important. So, how often have you order, like say I'm doing research on food delivery. How often have you ordered food in the past 3 weeks? Right. So that could give you an indicator as to like how often people are ordering food and like help with segmentation. I'm not asking them why they're ordering food because that is a horrible question to ask within a survey because you're not going to get any depth of information, right? You're going to get somebody like smashing their face against the keyboard or dropping out from your survey or just not answering it. So like really make sure that they're like really specific pointed questions that leave no room for interpretation. Carolyn Jarrett wrote an amazing book called Surveys That Work, and I like that is one of the best books on surveys, so I highly recommend it.
And also, recency needs to be taken into consideration, right? Because as you mentioned, if you ask somebody how often have you ordered takeout in the last 3 weeks, they will be able to provide an accurate answer. If you ask them how often have you ordered takeout in the last year, that will be a random number that they think might be true.
Yeah. People will make stuff up. They will.
Another question is more focused on the speedy environment we are living in. In agile environments, how can researchers provide value in more technical meetings, such as user story refinements?
You don't necessarily have to. We don't have to provide value literally everywhere. But one thing that I have done in more technical meetings, like sitting in when we're doing like t-shirt estimation, so estimation size or user stories, is I always go back and help refine or help them understand from the user's perspective. So I'm like literally just there as like voice of the customer. So if we're doing a user story and somebody's like going ahead and writing some sort of user story, I'm always there to kind of be like, hey, like don't forget about this, that, or the other thing, or hey, that sounds great. Or if we're doing like t-shirt estimations on like potential impact, I'm always like, oh, remember that usability study that we did where like 50% of people were confused about this, like changing this would actually have like a much bigger impact. But like also like don't try and force your value. Like you are inherently valuable as a researcher. That doesn't mean that we have to like have value in like literally everything. So like if you're not feeling like you are providing value, like you might not have to within that context. So like don't feel like you always have to bring something valuable.
Or basically not to feel that you are obliged to always provide value, or sometimes being the voice of the customer in a meeting where the customer is not present is more than enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a tip for a book for surveys and understanding more about surveys. We have a question for another tip. Can you recommend any agile books and or training for UX designers and researchers?
For agile in
Yeah.
particular, not off the top of my head. I would say the Design Sprint book would probably be like the book called Sprint would probably be quite helpful. I would also say like you don't have to read books only on research and design. Read books that are made for product managers. So Marty Kagan, for instance, has a bunch of different books for product managers. And one of the best things that I did was actually pick up those books and read them because it helped me understand what product managers were doing and what they were told to be doing by the bigger product managers. So while I don't have any like direct recommendations on like UX research and design for agile, I would say one, Sprint, and two, look at just general books on agile and look at books for product managers because that will help you understand the environment that they're trying to work in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Right. So also reading books which are approximate to UX research can tell you a lot about how to do UX research, actually, because you will be interacting with those people on a daily basis. Since we are a little over the time, one last question, and then we will have to end this webinar. It's a combination of two questions which came in, and people are asking how to start off as a UX researcher after you have finished some courses and some maybe formal education, what are the main skills, soft skills or hard skills the people should focus when they are starting with the UX research in the industry after finishing some courses or the education in the university.
Yeah. So the skills that I really recommend getting more comfortable with are things like stakeholder management, which is a very, very broad skill. But I would say things like workshop facilitation. So learning how to run workshops is something that's really, really important because that's how we activate our research. So when we're done with our research, we need to activate it usually through workshops, and that's like ideation workshops. So Crazy Eights, for instance, is a very good method to understand how to generate a bunch of ideas and then go and test them. So workshop facilitation is a really big one. Start like dabbling a little bit in like business, right? I know it's scary, but like understanding how businesses work and operate is super important as a user researcher, to really like get into that mindset of like, okay, businesses need to make money. They won't exist if they don't make money, and that means our jobs won't exist, right? So like, how can we help businesses be more successful? So looking into like that business space as well. And then I would say the final thing to really look into is like storytelling, such a broad one, but like writing. Um, and you don't have to be a master writer, but like um, understanding how to communicate your ideas effectively. So, and you can do this with like, I've practiced this, all of this stuff with literally like anybody. Like if my boyfriend doesn't understand me, I'm not communicating well. So I will ask him. I'm so annoying as like a friend and like a human, because I always ask like, oh, did you understand me? Does that make sense? Why doesn't it make sense? So like start like questioning everything. And like utilizing like just like day-to-day experiences to understand if you're communicating yourself well.
Well, in the end, it's the job of the researcher, right? To question everything and learn about everything if possible.
Exactly.
So thank you everyone who asked questions in the chat, who joined us today. And Nikki, before we end today, do you have anything coming up that you would like to highlight? Anything that people can look forward to, and that you would like them to know about?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just like, if you want to know what I'm up to, follow me on LinkedIn and on Substack. Those are my big places. I am launching a really big user research AI prompt library next week. So it's about 60 copy and paste prompts that you can use as a researcher, that I've used for the past like 3 years and refined and iterated on. So that's a really big one. But yeah, if you just give me a shout on LinkedIn, I would really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Nikki, again for joining us today and for sharing incredible insights from your experiences in UX world. And I think everyone who joined us today will be ever so encouraged to delve into research and to work on themselves and on the research approaches that they want to learn about. And I think they get so much motivation from this. It's great. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us today. Before we end the live stream today, we would like to let you know about the upcoming webinars. We have 2 webinars coming in February. First up, we have a webinar with our colleague Tina about the 50 episodes of UX our Geeks, our podcast, which we have released so far, and what are the main learnings that we gathered from these incredible interviews with people like Nikki and other experts that we managed to invite. And by the end of the February, we'll have a webinar on how to create a UX portfolio that stands out with Aneta Kmiecik. So stay tuned, and the links are in the description for these webinars as well. Thank you so much, everybody who came today, and have a lovely remainder of the day. Bye-bye.